The rain was hitting the window pane hard, making a sound that felt like small stones being thrown against the glass. Inside the house, it was quiet, but not a peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind of quiet that happens when people are tired of each other but are too afraid to say it out loud. Eleanor sat in her old wooden rocking chair in the corner of the living room. She was holding a small, soft photo frame in her hands. It was a picture of her late husband. They had been married for 45 years before he passed away. Looking at his smile made her feel a little less lonely in this big, strange house. This house didn't feel like home. It belonged to her son, David, and his wife, Jessica. It was a modern house with sharp corners, white walls, and cold floors. Everything was very clean and very new. Eleanor's old furniture, the things she loved, were mostly sold or given away when she moved in. She had sold her own little cottage to pay off some big hospital bills she had a few years back. She didn't have much money left. When David told her to come live with them, she felt relieved. She thought she would be useful. She thought she would help with the cooking and cleaning, and maybe watch her grandchildren grow up. But things didn't turn out that way. Jessica, her daughter-in-law, was a very different person from Eleanor. Jessica was always busy. She worked in a big office in the city and dressed in sharp suits. She liked things to be perfect. When Eleanor tried to help by cooking dinner, Jessica would complain that the food was too salty or too greasy. When Eleanor tried to clean, Jessica would follow her around, fixing the cushions Eleanor had just fluffed or moving the vase Eleanor had just dusted. It made Eleanor feel like she couldn't do anything right. She felt like a burden, a guest who had stayed too long. That Tuesday evening was particularly bad. The storm outside made the sky dark even though it was only 5 in the afternoon. David wasn't home yet. He was working late at his office, trying to finish a big project. Eleanor was alone with Jessica and the 2 kids. The kids were upstairs in their rooms, playing video games with the volume up loud. Eleanor was in the living room, trying to keep herself busy. She had just finished folding a big basket of laundry. She took great care in folding the shirts, smoothing out the wrinkles with her wrinkled hands. She wanted to show Jessica that she was helpful. She wanted to earn her keep. Jessica walked into the living room. She was holding a cup of coffee and looking at her phone. She didn't even look at Eleanor as she sat down on the big white sofa. She typed a message quickly and then sighed loudly. Eleanor placed a neatly folded towel on the table near the sofa. She thought she was just being helpful. "Mom," Jessica said, her voice sharp and cold. She didn't take her eyes off her phone. "I told you not to put the wet towels on the wooden table. It leaves rings. I've told you this 100 times. Eleanor pulled her hand back quickly, as if she had touched a hot stove. "I'm sorry, Jessica," Eleanor said softly. "It wasn't wet. I dried it first. I just wanted to put it here so you could take it upstairs easily." Jessica finally looked up. Her eyes were narrow. "It's not about the towel, Mom. It's about the space. You're always everywhere. In the kitchen when I'm trying to make coffee. In the living room when I'm trying to relax. It's like I have no privacy in my own house." Eleanor felt a sting in her chest. It felt like a pinch. She sat back down in her rocking chair. "I'm just trying to help," she whispered. "I don't want to be in the way." "Well, you are," Jessica snapped. She put her phone down on the table with a loud thud. The air in the room felt heavy. Eleanor looked down at her lap. She twisted her fingers together nervously. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to go back to her own little cottage, even if it was small and leaky. At least there, she was the boss. Here, she felt like a child who was always being scolded. Jessica took a deep breath and stood up. She started pacing around the room. David works so hard. He comes home tired, and all he hears is you worrying about this or that. He can't even focus on us because he's always worried about you. You need more medicine, you need new glasses, you don't like the TV shows we watch, it's never ending. I pay for my own medicine, Eleanor said, defending herself quietly. And I never ask for anything. You don't have to ask, Jessica yelled, her voice getting louder. Your very presence is the problem. We bought this house to have a life for our family. Just the four of us. But now, it's crowded. It's noisy. I feel like I can't breathe. Eleanor stayed silent. She knew that if she argued, it would only make things worse. She remembered her husband always telling her, silence is the best answer to a fool. She didn't think Jessica was a fool, but she knew she was angry. Very angry. So, Eleanor sat there, rocking gently in her chair, trying to block out the hurtful words. But Jessica wasn't finished. The stress of her job, the stormy weather, and the built-up resentment of the last few months came pouring out. She looked at Eleanor, who looked so small and frail in the big chair. You know what, Jessica shouted. I can't do this anymore. I really can't. I come home, and I want to relax, and instead, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells because I might hurt your feelings or you might start crying. I'm done. Eleanor looked up. She saw Jessica's face turn red. It was scary. Eleanor had never seen her like this before. Usually, Jessica was cold and distant, but today she was a different person. The sound of the rain outside seemed to get louder, matching the tension inside. Jessica, please, Eleanor said, her voice trembling. David will be home soon. We shouldn't fight. Fight? We aren't fighting, Jessica screamed. I am telling you how it is. I have kept this inside for too long. And frankly, I don't care if David is coming home soon. Maybe he needs to hear this too. He is too soft on you. He feels guilty, so he lets you stay here and take over our lives. But I am not him. Jessica walked right up to Eleanor's rocking chair and loomed over her. Eleanor looked up, frightened. She felt trapped. Do you know what I did today? Jessica asked, her voice shaking with rage. I looked at a brochure for a retirement community. I was actually considering it because I just want my house back. But then I thought, why should I pay for that? Why should we spend our savings on that when you have a family? Eleanor didn't know what to say. She felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she blinked them away. She refused to let Jessica see her cry. You say I take over the house, Eleanor said, her voice gaining a little strength. I cook. I clean. I pick up the kids from school when you are busy. I do everything I can to be invisible. You aren't invisible. Jessica yelled. You are unavoidable. I see your coat on the hook. I see your shoes in the hallway. I see your magazines on the table. Everything in this house reminds me that you are here, and I just want my space back. I want my life back. The room fell silent for a moment after Jessica stopped shouting. The only sound was the clock ticking on the wall and the rain hitting the glass. Eleanor's heart was beating fast. She felt sick to her stomach. She realized that no matter how much she cooked or cleaned, it wouldn't matter. Jessica didn't want her help. She just wanted her gone. Eleanor slowly stood up. She wasn't tall, and she had a slight hunch in her back. She looked Jessica in the eye. "I understand," Eleanor said calmly. "I am not happy here either. I don't want to be where I am not wanted." Jessica looked surprised for a second, as if she didn't expect Eleanor to agree. But then her expression hardened again. "Good. Then you know what you have to do." Eleanor nodded. She turned around and walked slowly toward the hallway that led to the guest bedroom. Every step felt heavy. She felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her shoulders. She was going to have to pack. She was going to have to leave in the middle of a storm. Where would she go? She didn't know. Maybe she could call her sister, but she lived 3 states away. Maybe a hotel, but she didn't have much money. The fear was real, but the sadness was heavier. As she walked down the hall, she heard Jessica behind her. "And don't think David is going to save you this time," Jessica called out. "He's going to side with me. He has to. We are his future. You are his past." Eleanor stopped walking. She closed her eyes for a second. Those words hurt more than anything else. His future. You are his past. It was a cruel thing to say, but maybe it was true. Eleanor took a deep breath and continued walking. She entered the small guest room. It was barely big enough for a bed and a small dresser. The walls were painted a light blue, which Eleanor had picked herself to try and make it feel calming. But now, it felt like a prison cell. She walked over to the closet and took out her old suitcase. It was dusty and had scratches on it from when she and her husband used to travel. She placed it on the bed and opened it up. The sound of the latches clicking open echoed in the quiet room. She looked around at her things. A few clothes hanging up, some toiletries on the nightstand, her Bible on the bedside table. It didn't look like much, but it was all she had. She started to take the clothes off the hangers. Her hands were shaking so much that she almost dropped a blouse. She took a deep breath to steady herself. "Pack," she told herself. "Just pack and get out." She could hear Jessica in the kitchen now, slamming cupboard doors. It was a clear sign of aggression. Eleanor tried to block it out. She focused on the task at hand. She folded her clothes neatly, just like she had done in the living room, but this time, she was packing them away to leave. She felt a lump in her throat. She remembered the day she moved in. David had hugged her and said, "Mom, you're home now." That felt like a lifetime ago. She packed her toothbrush, her comb, and her small bottle of perfume. She picked up the photo frame from the bedside table. It was a picture of her and David on his wedding day. They were both smiling. She looked at the picture for a long time. She hesitated. Should she leave it or should she take it? It was one of her few treasures. She gently wrapped it in a sweater and placed it in the suitcase, right on top. She zipped the suitcase shut. It was heavy. Lifting it made her back ache. She stood by the bed for a moment, looking at the empty closet. It looked bare, just like she felt inside. She wasn't just leaving a room, she was leaving her family. She was accepting that she wasn't needed here anymore. Eleanor looked out the window. It was dark now. The rain was pouring down harder than ever. The wind was howling, making the tree branches scratch against the house. It was a terrible night to be homeless. But she knew she couldn't stay. She had held onto her dignity all night by staying silent, but staying in this house 1 minute longer would destroy that dignity completely. She picked up her handbag and put it over her shoulder. Then, she gripped the handle of the suitcase. She took one last look at the room, whispered a silent goodbye, and turned toward the door. She was ready to walk out into the storm. She had no idea where she would go, but she knew she couldn't stay where she wasn't wanted. She took a deep breath, steeled her nerves, and stepped out into the hallway to face the music. The hallway felt longer than usual as Eleanor walked back toward the living room. The suitcase bumped gently against her leg with every step, the wheels clicking softly on the wooden floor. It was a quiet sound, but to Eleanor, it seemed like thunder. She felt like she was walking to her own execution, except she wasn't dying, she was just being erased from her son's life. The hallway was dim, lit only by a small lamp on a side table. It cast long, shaky shadows that looked like fingers reaching out to stop her. But she kept going. She had to. When she reached the end of the hall, the living room came into view. Jessica was sitting on the big white sofa again, her legs crossed, staring at her phone. She looked completely calm, as if nothing had happened. The only sign of her earlier anger was the flushed color still on her cheeks. On the table next to her sat a glass of red wine. She took a slow sip, swirling the liquid around in the glass, not even looking up as Eleanor entered the room dragging her heavy bag. Eleanor stopped near the entrance of the room. She didn't know what to say. Should she say goodbye? Should she apologize one last time? Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She felt small and insignificant standing there in her old cardigan and slippers, while Jessica looked like a queen on her throne. Jessica finally looked up. She didn't look surprised to see the suitcase. She didn't look guilty, either. She just looked annoyed, like Eleanor was a piece of furniture she was happy to see moving out of the way. "You're actually doing it?" Jessica asked, raising an eyebrow. She took another sip of her wine. Eleanor nodded slowly. "You said you wanted the house back," Eleanor said, her voice sounding weak and tired. "I am leaving, Jessica. I don't want to cause any more trouble." Jessica put her glass down with a loud clink. "Trouble? You've been nothing but trouble since the day you walked through that door, Eleanor. Don't act like you're doing me a favor by leaving. You're doing what you should have done months ago." The words stung, but Eleanor took a deep breath and held it in. She reminded herself that she was doing this for David. If she stayed, there would be a fight every night. If she left, maybe David and Jessica could be happy again. She was sacrificing her own comfort for their peace. That's what mothers do, she told herself. "Where will you go?" Jessica asked, though it didn't sound like she really cared. It sounded more like she was curious to see if Eleanor would crumble. I don't know," Eleanor admitted honestly. "I will find a motel. Or maybe I can call my friend in the city." "A motel?" Jessica let out a short, cold laugh. "With what money you sold your house to pay those medical bills, remember you barely have enough for your weekly groceries. You're going to burn through your savings in a week staying in a motel." Eleanor felt a flash of panic. Jessica was right. The money was very tight. But she couldn't stay here. She just couldn't. "I will manage," Eleanor said, gripping the handle of her suitcase tighter until her knuckles turned white. "Please, just let me go. Don't worry about me." Jessica stood up. She walked over to Eleanor, stopping just a few feet away. She was taller, and she used her height to look down on Eleanor. "I'm not worried about you, Eleanor. I'm worried about us. I'm worried about David. Do you know how hard it is for him to come home to see his mother moping around like a lost puppy? It's pathetic." You're acting like a victim, but really, you're just clinging onto the past. I am not pathetic, Eleanor said quietly, a spark of defense finally lighting in her eyes. I raised a son on my own after his father died. I worked 2 jobs. I kept a house together. I am not weak. I am just respecting your wishes. Jessica rolled her eyes so hard it looked like it hurt. Respecting my wishes, you're guilt-tripping me, is what you're doing. You're standing there with your little bag and your sad eyes, waiting for me to say, "Oh no, Mom, please stay." Well, it's not going to happen. I want you out. Tonight. Just then, the front door opened. The sound of the wind and rain rushed into the quiet house, making the curtains flutter. David stepped inside, shaking his umbrella. He looked wet and exhausted. He had been working long hours for weeks, and it showed on his face. He had dark circles under his eyes, and his tie was loose. He closed the door, shutting out the storm, and looked into the living room. He froze. He saw Eleanor standing there with her suitcase, her face pale and wet with tears she was trying to hide. Then he saw Jessica standing with her arms crossed, looking angry. "What is going on?" David asked, his voice full of confusion. He dropped his briefcase on the floor with a thud. "Mom, why do you have the suitcase? Are you going somewhere?" Eleanor opened her mouth to speak, but Jessica cut her off instantly. "She's leaving, David. Finally. We talked about it, and she agreed it's for the best." David looked from his wife to his mother. He walked into the room, ignoring the wet puddle he was making on the floor. Leaving to go where, Mom? What is she talking about?" Eleanor looked at her son. She saw the worry in his eyes. She wanted to run to him and hug him, like she used to when he scraped his knee as a boy. She wanted to tell him that his wife was being cruel and that she was scared to go out into the night alone. But she saw how tired he was. She saw him looking back and forth between them, already stressed out. If she told him the truth, he would fight with Jessica. There would be screaming, maybe things would get thrown, and the marriage would suffer even more. Eleanor couldn't be the reason for a divorce. She couldn't be the wedge that drove them apart. "I'm just going to visit Aunt Rose for a little while, David," Eleanor lied. It was a terrible lie, and her voice shook as she said it. Aunt Rose had passed away 2 years ago. But she needed to give him a reason that sounded safe. I've been feeling a bit cooped up. Jessica is right, I need some space." David looked at his mother skeptically. He knew her too well. He could see she was trembling. "Mom, it's pouring rain outside. It's 9 o'clock at night. You can't drive to Aunt Rose's now. Just stay the night. We can talk about this in the morning." "No," Jessica said sharply. "She wants to go, David. Let her go. She's an adult, aren't you, Eleanor? She can make her own decisions." David turned to his wife, his face hardening. "Jessica, stop it. What is wrong with you? Look at her. She's upset. You can't just kick her out in the middle of a storm." "I'm not kicking her out," Jessica yelled, her volume rising instantly. "She decided to leave. I'm just supporting her decision." "Or are you saying she isn't allowed to leave? Is she a prisoner here? Do you control everything she does, David?" Eleanor saw the trap. Jessica was twisting David's words. If he insisted Eleanor stay, he was controlling her. If he let her go, he was abandoning her. Jessica was playing a game, and she didn't care who got hurt. "I'm not controlling anyone," David said, running a hand through his wet hair in frustration. I just want to know why this is happening right now, in the middle of the night, without any warning. Because we are tired of walking on eggshells. Jessica screamed, losing her cool completely. The calm, collected woman from a moment ago was gone. We can't say anything to her without her crying or getting offended. I want my home back, David. I want my husband back. You spend all your time worrying about her feelings and none of your time caring about mine. I am your wife. She is your mother. It is time for her to get her own life. The words hung in the air, heavy and ugly. David looked at Jessica, stunned. He had never heard her speak like that before. He looked at Eleanor, hoping for a clue, but Eleanor was looking at the floor. She couldn't bear to see the look of betrayal in his eyes. She knew he loved her, but she also knew he loved his wife. He was stuck in the middle, and it was tearing him apart. Eleanor knew she had to leave right now, before the argument exploded. If she stayed, David might choose her, and then he would resent Jessica forever. Or he might choose Jessica, and his heart would break. She had to remove herself from the equation. She had to be the one to walk away. It's okay, David, Eleanor said, stepping forward. She reached out and patted his arm gently. It was a mother's touch, meant to soothe him. Jessica is right. I have been relying on you too much. You have a life here, a wife, a career. I need to learn to stand on my own 2 feet again. I'm old, but I'm not helpless. David grabbed her hand. Mom, please. Don't do this. We can fix whatever is wrong. Just tell me what happened. Nothing happened, Eleanor lied again, pulling her hand away gently. I just need some time. I'll call you tomorrow. I promise. She picked up her suitcase again. It felt heavier than before, like it was filled with stones instead of clothes. She started to walk toward the door. David took a step to follow her, but Jessica grabbed his arm. Let her go, David, Jessica said, her voice low and threatening. If you follow her, don't bother coming back tonight. David stopped. He looked at his wife's grip on his arm, then at the back of his mother walking toward the door. He was torn. Eleanor could feel his eyes on her back. She wanted him to chase her. She wanted him to tell Jessica to stop being ridiculous and to demand that his mother stay. But she knew that wasn't the reality of his life. He had built a life with this woman. He had children with her. He couldn't just throw that away, even for his mother. Eleanor reached the front door. She could hear the rain battering against it like a drum. It sounded cold and unforgiving. She hesitated for a split second, her hand hovering over the doorknob. This was the last time she would be in this house as a resident. The last time she would see the pictures on the wall, the rug she vacuumed, the kitchen where she made Sunday dinners. It was over. Goodbye, David, she said softly, without turning around. Mom. David called out, his voice cracking. But Eleanor didn't turn back. She couldn't. If she saw his face, she would break down. She would start crying, and she wouldn't be able to leave. She had to be strong. She had to be the mother he always knew, the one who handled things with grace. She turned the handle and pushed the heavy door open. A blast of wet, cold air hit her face instantly. It was freezing. The rain was coming down sideways, driven by the wind. The porch steps were slick with water. She stepped out onto the porch, pulling her cardigan tight around her chest to keep warm. She heard David's voice from inside, muffled through the closed door. He was arguing with Jessica. The sound of their shouting was muffled, but she could hear the anger in his tone. "You can't just treat people like that," David was yelling. "She's my mother. She's a burden," Jessica screamed back. "And if you can't see that, then you're just as blind as she is." Eleanor closed her eyes and took a deep breath of the rainy air. She felt a tear mix with the rain on her cheek. She was free of the shouting, free of the tension, but she was also alone. Truly alone. She lifted her heavy suitcase and walked down the 2 steps to the driveway. The wind whipped her gray hair around her face. She looked for her car, but then she remembered. David had used her car that day because his was in the shop. Her car was the only one in the garage, which meant the keys were likely on the hook inside. And even if she had the keys, she couldn't leave David stranded without a car while his was being fixed. She realized with a sinking feeling in her stomach that she had no ride. She couldn't drive away. She was going to have to walk. She looked down the long, dark street. The street lights were flickering, casting a yellow glow on the wet pavement. There were no sidewalks, just grass that was turning into mud. She didn't know where the nearest motel was. She had seen a sign for a small inn a few miles away when they drove to the grocery store last week. A few miles. In the rain. With a suitcase. "Okay, Eleanor," she whispered to herself. "One step at a time. You can do this." She pulled the handle of the suitcase up. It was a hard shell case, and it rolled loudly on the pavement. Rumble, rumble, rumble. She started walking. The first few minutes were the hardest. The rain soaked through her cardigan immediately. Her shoes were not meant for walking through puddles, they were thin house slippers. Within seconds, her socks were wet and squishy. The cold water seeped into her bones, making her shiver violently. Every time the suitcase wheel hit a crack in the pavement, it jerked her arm, sending a pain shooting up her shoulder. Cars drove past on the street, their headlights cutting through the dark. They splashed water up onto the curb. Eleanor had to step closer to the muddy grass to avoid getting soaked by the passing cars. She felt ridiculous. A 70-year-old woman, dragging a suitcase through a storm in her slippers. It felt like a scene from a sad movie, but it was her reality. She walked past a house with a warm light in the window. She could see a family sitting at a table through the blinds, eating dinner. They looked happy. They looked normal. Eleanor quickly looked away. It hurt too much to see. She kept her head down, focusing on the next step. Just get to the next street light. Just get to the next tree. Her mind was racing with thoughts. Where would she sleep? How much was a motel room? Did she have enough cash on her credit card? Fear was trying to take over, but she pushed it down. She had to keep moving. If she stopped, she might freeze. As she walked, the anger she had been suppressing started to bubble up. She was angry at Jessica for being so cruel. She was angry at the world for being so hard on old people. But mostly, she was angry at herself. She felt like she had failed. She had raised a good son, a son who loved her, but she hadn't taught him how to stand up to a bully like Jessica. Or maybe she had, and he was just choosing his wife. That thought hurt the most. She had walked for about 10 minutes when she heard a car coming up behind her. It was moving slowly. The headlights washed over her, illuminating her wet figure on the side of the road. She didn't turn around. She just kept walking, praying it wasn't someone she knew. She didn't want anyone to see her like this. The car pulled up beside her and slowed down to match her walking speed. It was a dark SUV. The window rolled down. Eleanor braced herself, expecting a stranger to yell something mean, or worse. "Eleanor, is that you?" a voice called out over the sound of the rain. Eleanor stopped. She wiped the rain from her eyes and turned to look. It was her neighbor, Mr. Higgins. He was an older man, a few years younger than her, who lived 3 houses down. He was driving a big, black SUV. He looked concerned, his brow furrowed behind his thick glasses. "Oh," Eleanor said, surprised. "Hello, Robert. I'm just going for a walk." Robert looked at her suitcase, then at her wet slippers. He didn't believe her for a second. "In the middle of a thunderstorm with your luggage, Eleanor? Get in the car. You're going to catch your death out here." "No, no," Eleanor waved him off, trying to sound casual. "I'm fine. Really. I'm just heading to a hotel." "Nonsense," Robert said firmly. He unlocked the doors. "Get in. I'm not leaving you here in this weather. We can argue about where you're going once you're dry." Eleanor hesitated. She was cold, so incredibly cold. The warmth coming from the car's open window was tempting. But she was embarrassed. She didn't want to admit she had been kicked out. "Please, Eleanor," Robert said, his voice softening. "I'm your neighbor. Let me help." Eleanor looked at the dark road ahead. She had miles to go. Her shoulder ached from the suitcase. She looked at Robert's kind face and sighed. She couldn't fight the whole world tonight. "Okay," she whispered. "Thank you." She struggled to lift the heavy suitcase into the back of the SUV, but Robert jumped out quickly and grabbed it from her, tossing it easily into the trunk. He held the passenger door open for her like a gentleman. Eleanor climbed in, the leather seat feeling warm and heavenly against her wet back. She shivered as Robert closed the door and ran around to the driver's side. He got in and shook off his umbrella. He turned on the heat, blasting it towards her. He didn't ask any questions immediately. He just put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. Eleanor sat there, clutching her wet cardigan, watching the rain beat against the window. She was safe for the moment, but the nightmare was far from over. She had nowhere to go, and her heart was breaking. She just wanted the night to end. The inside of the SUV felt like a different world. The sound of the heavy rain was now just a soft drumming on the roof, instead of the loud, angry noise that had been soaking her to the skin just moments before. The heater was blowing full blast, sending warm air onto Eleanor's freezing legs. She leaned her head back against the headrest and closed her eyes for a second, trying to stop her teeth from chattering. She was exhausted, not just in her body, but deep down in her soul. Robert drove carefully. The windshield wipers were moving back and forth frantically, clearing the water away so he could see the road. He didn't turn on the radio. He didn't try to make small talk about the weather or the garden. He just kept his eyes on the road, glancing over at her every now and then with a look that said he was worried, but he was trying to be respectful. Eleanor stared out the window. The street lights flashed by in a blur of yellow and orange. She watched the familiar neighborhoods pass by: the park where she used to take David to play when he was little, the library she visited every Tuesday, the grocery store where she knew exactly which aisle had the best canned tomatoes. It was her life passing by outside the glass, and she was leaving it all behind. "You're shivering," Robert said gently, breaking the silence. He reached over without looking and turned the heat knob up even higher. "Take your time warming up. Don't try to talk until you're ready. Thank you, Robert, Eleanor whispered. Her voice sounded raspy. You are very kind. I'm sorry for being a burden on you tonight. Robert shook his head firmly. He took a turn onto a main road where the traffic was a little lighter. You are not a burden, Eleanor. Please don't say that. You're a neighbor. And more importantly, you're a human being. No one should be walking in a storm like that. Eleanor looked down at her hands. They were red and swollen from the cold. She twisted the simple gold wedding band on her finger, a habit she had when she was nervous. She felt the weight of Robert's kindness, but it also made the shame burn hotter in her chest. She had always prided herself on being independent. She was the one who helped others, who brought soup to sick neighbors and baked cakes for new arrivals on the street. She wasn't the helpless old lady who needed rescuing. I can't go back there, Robert, she said suddenly, the words rushing out before she could stop them. I just can't. Robert glanced at her quickly, then back at the road. I figured, he said softly. I saw you walking away from the house with that suitcase. I didn't see David with you. Did something happen? Eleanor took a deep breath. She didn't want to gossip, and she didn't want to make her son look bad, but she felt like she was going to explode if she didn't tell someone. The words had been stuck in her throat all evening. Jessica, Eleanor said, and the name tasted like poison in her mouth. She doesn't want me there. She never really did. She yelled at me tonight. She told me to leave. Robert stayed silent for a moment, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. I see, he said slowly. I'm sorry, Eleanor. That's a terrible thing to happen. Does David know? He knows, Eleanor said, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. He was there when I left. But he was stuck in the middle. Jessica, she's very good at manipulating things. If David had tried to stop me, she would have made his life miserable. I left to save him the trouble. I didn't want to be the reason they fight. Robert let out a long sigh. You're a good mother, Eleanor. Putting your children before yourself, even when they are grown men. But you shouldn't have to suffer for it. I have nowhere to go, Eleanor admitted, her voice cracking. I have some money saved, but not enough for a hotel for long. I was going to look for a motel, just for tonight. But honestly, Robert, I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow. Or next week. She felt a wave of panic wash over her. The reality of her situation was hitting her hard. She was technically homeless. She was an elderly woman with no job, no house, and no place to sleep. Robert didn't answer right away. He drove for another minute in silence. Eleanor watched the raindrops race down the window. She felt hopeless. She was preparing herself for him to drop her off at a cheap motel on the edge of town, and she couldn't blame him. Why would he want to get involved in a messy family drama, you know? Robert started, keeping his eyes on the road. My house is just a few streets away. I have a guest room. It's not much, but it's clean, it's dry, and the heat works perfectly. You can stay there tonight. Or for a few nights. Until you figure things out. Eleanor turned to look at him, stunned. Oh, no, Robert. I couldn't possibly impose on you like that. It's too much. People will talk. Let them talk, Robert said with a shrug. Who cares, it's raining, Eleanor. It's dark. You are not checking into a motel alone in this condition. I won't allow it. I'm old enough to be stubborn, and I insist. He smiled a little bit, and Eleanor saw the kind man who had lived down the street for 10 years. He was a widower too, his wife had passed away about 5 years ago. He lived a quiet life, gardening and reading books. Eleanor realized she didn't know him very well, but right now, he was the only lifeline she had. "Are you sure?" Eleanor asked hesitantly. "I don't want to be any trouble." "I'm positive," he said firmly. "Besides, I have a pot of chili on the stove. It's too much for me to eat alone, and it's much better when shared with a friend." Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the car heater. A friend. She hadn't felt like a friend in a long time. In her son's house, she was a burden, a mother-in-law, a guest who overstayed her welcome. But here, in the car with Robert, she was just Eleanor. "Okay," she said softly. "Thank you. I would like that. The chili sounds wonderful." Robert nodded and turned the car toward his neighborhood. They drove the rest of the way in a comfortable silence. Eleanor watched the rain, but it didn't seem as scary anymore. She had a destination. She had a roof over her head for the night, at least. When they pulled into his driveway, the rain was still coming down hard. Robert didn't let her grab her suitcase. He told her to wait under the porch overhang while he parked the car in the garage. He ran out into the rain, popped the trunk, grabbed her heavy bag, and carried it effortlessly up the stairs to his front door. He held the door open for her, ushering her into the warmth of his home. His house was different from David's. It wasn't ultra-modern or cold, it felt lived in. The walls were covered with framed photographs, books were stacked on every surface, and there was a faint smell of wood polish and something cooking in the air. It felt safe. Sit down," Robert said, putting her suitcase in the hallway. He disappeared into the kitchen and came back with a fluffy towel. "Here. Dry your hair." Eleanor took the towel and wrapped it around her shoulders. She sat on his soft, worn sofa. It was comfortable, the kind of couch you sink into. Robert bustled around the kitchen for a moment, and soon the smell of spices and tomatoes filled the room. A few minutes later, he came back carrying 2 steaming bowls of chili and some cornbread. He placed them on the coffee table along with 2 spoons. "Eat," he said simply. "It'll warm you up from the inside." Eleanor hadn't realized how hungry she was until she smelled the food. She picked up the spoon and took a bite. It was delicious. Hearty and warm, just like something her own mother used to make. As she ate, the tight knot of anxiety in her stomach began to loosen. She looked across the table at Robert, who was eating quietly. "You are a good man, Robert," Eleanor said between bites. "I don't know what I would have done tonight if you hadn't driven by." "I'm just glad I saw you," he said. He looked at her, his expression serious. "So, what is the plan for tomorrow?" "You don't have to decide right this second, but we should think about it." Eleanor put down her spoon. She sighed heavily. "I don't know, Robert. I can't go back to David's. I just can't face Jessica again. I won't put myself in a position where I am shouted at in my own home. But I worry about David. He's going to be so upset when he realizes I'm really gone." "Did you tell him you were leaving for good?" Robert asked. "I told him I was going to visit Aunt Rose, which is a lie, and he knows it. But he didn't stop me. He didn't fight for me, Robert. That's the part that hurts the most. I know he loves me, but he's terrified of Jessica. He let me walk out into the storm without coming after me. Robert nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes, people get frozen in tough situations. He might regret not stopping you the moment you left. But you can't control his actions, Eleanor. You can only take care of yourself now. You need a place that is yours. A place where no one can tell you to leave. Eleanor looked around the cozy living room. I wish I could afford a small apartment. Just a one-bedroom place. Somewhere quiet. But with the cost of things these days, and my fixed income, I don't see how it's possible. I have a little bit of savings, but it won't last long paying rent every month. They sat in silence for a while, thinking. The only sound was the rain outside and the ticking of a clock on the wall. Eleanor felt safe for the moment, but the fear of the future was still there, lurking in the back of her mind. She couldn't live with Robert forever. That wouldn't be right. She was a guest, not his family. Well, Robert said finally, wiping his mouth with a napkin. You stay here as long as you need. We can figure out the money situation tomorrow. Maybe there are senior housing options, or community programs that can help. We will look in the morning. But for tonight, you are safe here. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. You've given me back my dignity. Robert smiled, but then he looked toward the window. His face turned serious. Speaking of David, he might come looking for you. Once he realizes you're not at a motel, he might drive around the neighborhood. He won't come here, Eleanor said, shaking her head. He wouldn't think to look for me with you. He probably assumes I went to the bus station or something. Maybe, Robert said. But he cares about you. He's going to panic when you don't answer your phone. Eleanor reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. It was dead. The battery had died while she was walking. I can't answer anyway, she said. Robert nodded. Good. Let him panic a little bit. Maybe it will wake him up. They finished their meal, and Eleanor helped him clear the table, just like she used to do at home. It felt nice to be useful, to be part of a routine. Robert showed her to the guest room. It had a comfortable bed with a thick quilt and a window that looked out into the backyard. The rain was still beating against the glass, but it sounded peaceful now, rhythmic and soothing. I put some fresh towels in the bathroom, Robert said, standing in the doorway. Take a hot shower. It'll help you sleep. Good night, Eleanor. Good night, Robert. And thank you. He closed the door, leaving her alone. Eleanor took a shower, letting the hot water wash away the chill of the rain and the smell of fear. She put on the dry pajamas she had packed in her hurry. They were her favorite pair, soft and old. She climbed into bed and pulled the quilt up to her chin. For a long time, she stared at the ceiling. She thought about David. She wondered if he was fighting with Jessica right now. She wondered if he was looking out the window, watching the rain, thinking of her. She felt a pang of guilt. Mothers are supposed to protect their children, and here she was, causing him pain. But then she remembered Jessica's face. The hate in her eyes. The voice screaming, "Leave my house." Eleanor knew she had done the right thing. She had to save herself. If she stayed, she would wither away like a plant that doesn't get enough sun. She would lose herself completely. She had to find her own ground to stand on, even if it was scary. Eventually, the tiredness took over. Her eyes grew heavy, and she drifted off to sleep. But her sleep was restless. She dreamed of walking down a long, dark road in the rain, calling David's name, but he never answered. She dreamed of a door slamming shut, locking her out in the cold. She woke up with a start a few hours later. The room was pitch black. She looked at the clock on the nightstand. It was 3:15 in the morning. She lay still, listening. The house was quiet. Robert was asleep in his room down the hall. Everything was calm. And then, she heard it. At first, she thought it was part of her dream. A rhythmic thumping sound. But as she woke up fully, she realized it wasn't a dream. It was real. Knock. 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 It was coming from the front door. Eleanor sat up in bed, her heart pounding. Who could be knocking on the door at 3 in the morning? Her first thought was that it was David. He had found her. Panic rose in her throat. She wasn't ready to face him. She wasn't ready to go back. Knock. 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 It was louder this time. More urgent. It wasn't the polite knock of a neighbor. It was the heavy, authoritative bang of someone who meant business. Eleanor threw off the covers and swung her legs out of bed. She hurried to the bedroom door and opened it just a crack, peeking out into the dark hallway. She could hear movement downstairs. Robert was up. She heard the floorboards creak as he walked down the hallway to the living room. "Hold on, I'm coming." Robert's voice called out, sounding sleepy but cautious. Eleanor stayed in the shadows of the hallway, holding her breath. She heard the click of the locks turning, and then the heavy creak of the front door opening. The cool night air blew into the house, rustling the papers on the table. "Yes, can I help you?" Robert's voice sounded deeper, protective. Eleanor crept a little closer, hugging herself. She needed to see who it was. She stepped into the dim light of the hallway. Standing on the porch, illuminated by the harsh porch light, was a man. He was tall and wet, with a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He looked frantic. "Robert," the man said, his voice trembling. "I know it's late. I'm so sorry to wake you up. But, is she here? Is my mom here?" It was David. Eleanor froze. Her hand flew to her mouth to cover a gasp. He looked terrible. His eyes were red and swollen, like he had been crying for hours. His clothes were soaking wet, just like hers had been earlier. He looked like he had run all the way there. Robert didn't step aside. He stood firm in the doorway, blocking David from entering. "Hello, David," Robert said calmly. "It is late. And yes, she is here. But she is sleeping." David let out a sob, a sound that broke Eleanor's heart. "Oh, thank God," he choked out. I went to the house to get her car keys, and she was gone. I've been driving around for hours looking for her. I checked every motel. I even drove past Aunt Rose's old house even though I knew she wasn't there. I was so scared." Robert looked at the young man shivering on his porch. He looked back into the shadows where Eleanor was standing. He didn't say a word, but he slightly moved his body, giving Eleanor the choice to show herself or stay hidden. David leaned forward, gripping the doorframe. "Robert, please. I need to see her. I need to know she's okay. Is she hurt?" Eleanor stepped out of the shadows. The floor creaked under her bare feet. David spun around. When he saw her standing there in her pajamas, looking tired and small, his face crumbled. He looked like a little boy who had lost his mother in a supermarket. The relief washed over him, mixed with pure agony. "Mom," he whispered. He took a step forward, but he didn't cross the threshold. He looked like he was afraid he wasn't allowed in. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Eleanor looked at her son. She saw the rain dripping off his nose. She saw the despair in his eyes. She felt a wave of love for him, but she also felt the wall she had built around herself tonight. She wasn't ready to let it down yet. "I'm here, David," she said quietly. "I'm safe." David fell to his knees on the porch, right there in the rain. He didn't care about the mud. "Please come home, Mom," he begged. "I was wrong. I shouldn't have let you go. I was a coward. Please forgive me." Eleanor stood firm. She felt Robert's presence behind her, a silent guardian. But she knew this was her moment. Her reckoning. She looked down at her son, and she realized that the man kneeling in the rain wasn't just asking her to come back to a house. He was asking for her forgiveness, but he was also asking for her help to fix his life. She took a deep breath. The nightmare wasn't over. It had just changed shape.